Thank you guys for coming and hanging out with us tonight. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm Rob Whiteside. You are listening or watching Deep in the Plus. Tonight we have a very special guest with us. It's always very special when she's here with us, and it is Katie from Disneyland News Today. Katie, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Rob?
I was doing really okay until I started messing up everything tonight, and I'm sure Ben is watching at home going, "Ugh, what the heck, man? You had one job. What were you doing?" So thank you guys for sticking with it. So Katie and I started talking about, like, we reviewed Mr. Boogedy, and that was her choice. I need to remind you that was your choice, right?
Was my choice. I'll take the blame.
Yeah. But you know what? When we went to review Mr. Boogedy, you actually gave another option that I thought, well, let's wait on that for a minute, and we are coming back to it tonight, and that is
The Rocketeer.
Oh my gosh, I love The Rocketeer. Honestly, it is one of my top 5, I think, Disney favorite movies. I loved seeing this movie when it first came out. It was in 1991. I was just a huge fan of the whole mythology of it. You know what? I love superheroes, and to me at the time, like, Cliff Secord was kind of a superhero, and there weren't a ton of Marvel and DC and all those movies out there. So it was really exciting to be able to see, these guys on the big screen, flying around and doing stuff. And so I was really enamored by it. But what brought you into it? What do you love so much about it?
I love the 1930s, like Los Angeles, almost steampunk style of this film. I grew up watching it. As a kid, I didn't like it as much, but as I got older, I grew to appreciate what The Rocketeer is. It's just like such a, not even obscure, just a little different for a Disney movie. And I think it has a place in Disney's library that many people don't know about. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Okay, so I've got, actually, let me do this. I've got a Rocketeer poster behind me. And it was a one sheet that I got from the movie theater where I first saw it. I was pretty excited about that. But there isn't a lot of other stuff out there about the Rocketeer. Now, it started out as a comic book by Dave Stevens, I believe. And it was a comic book for a while, and then Disney in the 80s, and I think Disney picked up the rights to it, and they made it a movie. Man, I think it's really, I don't know. It's interesting to me that it takes place in 1938, and there are a lot of movies around the same time that kind of take place in that same era, that almost like that golden age of Hollywood. Because I started thinking about it, and I started thinking, you have Roger Rabbit, which was 1989. You've got, 1990, you had Dick Tracy. 1991, you have The Rocketeer. And it's all in that romanticized era. And aside from Roger Rabbit, most of these movies didn't do too well. But it's also the same time the Hollywood studios opened up. And it kind of has that Sunset Boulevard, feel to it as well around that same time period. So the one thing that this does put them in the era of are the Nazis, right? So we've got some serious trouble in this movie right from the beginning when the Nazis are after the jetpack.
Right. So the film it starts off with, we see Cliff, who is an aspiring pilot in Los Angeles. He's super into all the planes. He's on the runway every day, and they so happen to find this rocket in one of the planes. And Cliff and Petey, who is kind of like it reminded me almost of like a Doc Brown, Marty McFly duo kind of thing. Like, Petey he helps him with the planes and get ready for all his flights, and he shows them this rocket that they find when they're in the garage, and they have no idea where it comes from. They have no clue what it is, how important it is, that the Nazis are after it. So that's how it starts. And do you want me to keep talking about it? I'm not sure how in depth. Rob cannot hear you.
And now I'm muted. Wow. Anyway, yeah, I'm still seeing some stuff in the chat about people were having some problems with stuff. So hopefully you guys can still hear us okay and everything's all right. But I was just kind of trying to troubleshoot a little bit more. So anyway, and now I'm getting muted. Yep, I was definitely muted. Anyway,
okay.
So I started looking back about some other stuff in this movie too, like the gum, right? So like they make a big deal about the gum, right? It's in his pockets when they have him clean out his pockets. He gets a pack of it at the end of the movie. So I looked this up. It was the Lucky Beeman's, which was the gum, is an actual gum, was the lucky gum of pilots. And it was a superstition based on the fact that it's had unsubstantiated claims of preventing seasickness and therefore air sickness. But chewing gum of any type, they're saying, promoted equalizing the pressure in the ears. So, but Beeman's was apparently like a lucky gum, and that was something that they kind of came back from over and over again, right? Like they, the gum on the tank when he got the bullet hole, let's fix it. The gum was on the airplane when he was flying it. So that part I thought was pretty cool. Also, GB apparently is a real thing. So the plane that Peevy put together, the GB, was the Granville GB because it was the Granville brothers aircrafts. So GB and right, like these are things that I never thought of before. So when you brought it up, like I never thought, is like the GB really a thing? I never really thought about that. And so when you brought up this movie, I was like, yeah, that's kind of cool that this is like really accurate, isn't it?
The film really is, and there's a lot of, when I was looking into it, just in setting wise, it's interesting how they play the Los Angeles set in the film, because there's a lot of like, the director talks about Joe Johnson. He talks about how the like Bulldog ice cream shop kind of diner actually was like a place where he would go in Los Angeles as a child, and there's a lot of realism in the film, I think. And the gum, obviously is like an icon that moves like it's in the last scene, he pulls the gum off the jetpack. So I do think it's interesting to see how that the gum actually is real and it was a superstition.
Right. So one of the things about this is it's he finds the jetpack and it's like he's finding his superpower. That's kind of his origin story, right? The jetpack is hidden in the barn. He's trying to fly the GB. He's trying to get into nationals, and it reminded me of like Pitch Perfect. They're always talking about the nationals, right? So we don't really know much about the nationals, only the fact that they're like they want to get in the nationals for the stunt flying, and something bad happens to the plane because of this chase. And then they luck into getting the jetpack, and then because Peevy's such a smart guy, he's going to be able to figure out how to make this jetpack work that Howard Hughes couldn't even figure out how to work. And then once they get into a situation where his friend is up in the plane and he needs help, he flies up to get him, and then the Rocketeer is born. And, the Rocketeer costume has a lot to do with the helmet, which Peevy made, which I think was really cool because I learned about you see the helmet in the poster before you ever learn where it came from. And then after he makes it, you're like, well, that's about the coolest thing ever. I would like to have a Rocketeer helmet like that.
And there was, when Disney was producing the film, there was a lot of controversy about, are they going to keep the original costume that was from the comics, or were they going to go a different route and do more of a futuristic style look? And the guy Dave, who made the comic book, said he wasn't going to help in production if they didn't keep the original helmet.
Well, so I'll talk about this later. There's a new cartoon, The Rocketeer, on Disney Junior, and they don't keep the original helmet, which is kind of a bummer. We'll talk about it. We will definitely talk about it. So the costume in general was very cool, though. And I actually have this little, I have very few things that are, from the movie, but I have this little guy, which is it was a Vinylmation from back when that was a thing. But like the jacket and the pants and the helmet, the whole thing was just a really cool outfit. And I think that was like a really neat look. And, you see people cosplay it now at D23 or at like Dragon Con, places like that. It's really neat to see people. It's just a cool costume. I mean, it just is. So the idea but it's very basic and simple. It doesn't have a cape and it doesn't have, a big logo on it. It's just kind of basic and simple. But when he flies up to save his friend, he's got the helmet because that's what Peevy gave him to protect him and to help him to fly. And then he's got the jetpack, which looks cool, and his already flight jacket, and like the whole thing comes together. And now he has like this basically costume and the birth of the Rocketeer. I do think, though, that when all the press comes in to interview the owner of the airfield, and he's like, well, they're like, what do you call him? And it's like, he's the Rocket Man. No, that's not right. Well, it's this. And he looks out the window and sees Pioneer, and he goes, he's the Rocket ear. Yeah. I felt that one, that like maybe like when I first watched it I didn't feel that way about it, but when I rewatched it now I felt like that felt pretty bad. Like there should have been a better
Oh,
origin than he looked out. Yeah.
I wonder, and too, I was interested. I kind of want to just like take a look at the comic now to see how much actually was transferred into the production of the film. Like, was that how he actually got his name in the comic? I have no idea.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that I knew that one for sure, but no, I honestly, I believe I have a copy of one of the comics somewhere, but I don't think I have ever like, uh, I don't think I've read it. I think I just bought it because it had a cool cover. Um, so the other thing about this movie is it's got a lot of stars in it that were stars at the time, or maybe kind of rising stars at the time. So Bill Campbell is in it. I don't know why Bill Campbell wasn't a bigger deal. I mean, I feel comfortable saying this. He was a good looking guy. Like,
Oh, well,
the hair was on point. I mean, he could have like, he could have subbed in for the Backstreet Boys. He was a good looking guy. I don't know why he didn't get more work. I think he was a pretty good actor in this one. Jennifer Connelly, I definitely was crushing hard on Jennifer Connelly when I saw this movie the
he's
first time.
amazing.
She was in Career Opportunities. She was in Labyrinth, Beautiful Mind, and the Bad Hulk movie. And now she's married to Vision. So, that's interesting too.
I
Um,
thought it was crazy to see, like, I recently watched Labyrinth, so it was crazy to see, like, in such a short time she aged because she's only 19 in The Rocketeer, where I think she had to be like 14 in Labyrinth, and she looks significantly older. And I was wondering, I meant to look too, as how old was Bill Campbell in this film, but I don't know. I thought that was interesting. She was only 19.
Yeah. The other thing about this movie is the language that they use, like the FBI agents are using, because you talk about them together, and it's like she's his best gal, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That I guess was of the time, but it's like he's your buddy over there's been fitted for a pine box. You see, I mean, it's just like some of that stuff.
The language is kind of milked a little bit. Like they kept calling Peevy Dad. They're like, whatever you say, Dad. It's like, how many times are you gonna call him Dad?
As many as it takes, I guess. I don't know. I just
Yeah.
like that's the whole mobster thing. I mean, the great movie Ride and the gangster scene. It's like that whole thing. I mean, that language of the time, I guess. But it's so overdone in this movie sometimes. Like you almost need like in some of the things the FBI agents are saying to Wilmer when they first catch him. It sounds like they're like you need a translator book to try to figure out what exactly they're saying to him. That it's so thick, but yeah, they kept calling him Dad, and I would have felt Pops would have been a better fit for him.
Oh,
I
right.
guess
I
not.
was
I don't know.
interested. My dad.
Paul Sorvino was in this, and he plays Valentine. Ron Howard's brother was in it. He whispers in Neville Sinclair's ear, and I don't know that I see him anywhere else in the movie. Ron Howard always had him along as his kind of like lucky charm. So in the chat, they're saying Bill Campbell was 32 in 1991. So that's
32.
wow.
Thank
That's
you, Chad.
crazy. And you said she was 19?
She was
That
19.
Jennifer Connelly was 19? Wow. That's almost like Natalie Portman and never mind. I was going to make some Star Wars Phantom Menace references, but we'll move on from that. So there are a lot of other characters in here that you don't see in a lot of places, but like Jan from The Office was the singer.
What's up?
Yeah, she was a singer in the lounge. Terry O'Quinn was Howard Hughes, and he was John Locke on Lost.
I think his
Timothy
performance is
Dalton.
one of the really good ones too in the film. And I was just reading stuff today. Like he seems to have a little bit of a following for his work he did in Rocketeer, and I think he deserved it. He did a really good job portraying Hughes.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, he was so cool in that, and that's what that role called for. I mean, he was like, the man of the times. So that was really neat that he played that off so well. But I was also going to say Timothy Dalton, which I think this was the first thing I saw him in after he had been a Bond. And so it was kind of like, felt like a step down for him.
Yeah.
I think this was after he was a Bond, but you know, now he's on Doom Patrol on the DC streaming service. So I guess that, you know, it can go down from there. Um, but there was a TV show called Newhart back in the 90s, I think, and there was a guy that would walk in and he'd say, "I'm Daryl. This is my, I'm Larry. This is my brother Daryl, and this is my other brother Daryl." And so the guy who played Larry was Goose in this one, and then Margot Martindale, who was she was Millie in the Diner. She was also Ma Beagle in the latest DuckTales, and then she was also in Cars 3. So I think, again, just like these characters that you see, though, like that were in this movie, and you're like, oh, I know them from something, except Patsy, the little girl who, like, Cliff yells at for a minute and then lets her go. She was in, like, 2 things, and then this was one, and then I guess she, like, tapped out. You know, you might as well go out when you're on top, right?
Yeah. She said, "My career's over, I'm away."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that makes sense. But, you know, obviously, you know, it was kind of like a little cast that could. I think that probably Alan Arkin was probably one of the biggest names, maybe he and Timothy Dalton in this thing when it came out. So it only had like a $40 million budget, although it only made like 40 million at the box office. Like, so it made 40, I think, 70.
Originally, I think they gave them the budget of 25 million for the film, and they actually originally wanted Johnny Depp to play Cliff, and he said no. So they're like, okay, we're gonna give you guys 25 million for the budget, and they went 50 days over filming, and they weren't sure, but then they showed Disney the footage, and Disney loved it, so they raised it to 35 million. But then I think they only ended up making around 40 million at the box office, so it was just deemed as a failure by them.
Yeah, 40 million was the cost, and 47 million was what it made at the box office. So, you know, but I feel like it's a bigger movie than that. I feel like more people know about it, more people talk about it, but maybe it's just because we're in the Disney fandom and, you know, and they talk about it more. But I feel like most people know Rocketeer. The director was Joe Johnston, who Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Rocketeer, Jumanji, Jurassic Park 3, Captain America: The First Avenger. I mean, he has had some good movies. He also had Nutcracker in the Four Realms, though, and Hidalgo. So, you know, I guess you get wins and you get losses.
He was probably what I enjoyed learning most about looking more into this film. I actually didn't know he was a student at Cal State Long Beach and started working in college for George Lucas without even knowing. He just started working as an intern, and he was actually the last person to finalize designs for Yoda, Boba Fett, the Millennium Falcon, AT-ATs. He did a lot for Star Wars, and George actually loved his work and paid for him to go to school at University of Southern California, where he got his film degree, and then I think a few years later he went on to film or direct Rocketeer, which is just crazy. He had such a fast start to this film.
Yeah. Well, and I think he does a great job. I mean, clearly I'm drawn to the movies that he does. So, and then the music of James Horner, which the soundtrack is one of my favorite things about this. Very uplifting, very cool. You know, I definitely know that they've, you know, you hear it in things at Hollywood studios. It's a very cool soundtrack. And I was looking up James Horner, who did a lot of music for James Cameron. So he did Avatar, he did Titanic. He also did Captain EO and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So again, maybe Joe Johnston went to him a lot for his stuff too. But Captain EO, Back to the Parks, that's kind of cool. And I mean, I don't understand how you can write music, much less how you can write that much music and have it all be different. But I'm a huge fan of this music.
This specific score only took him 3 weeks too, which I thought was just crazy, because it's such a memorable score. You hear it in the park still. Like 3 weeks is pretty good.
Well, and some people have said it's like his best work too. So I mean, which I would definitely say I would agree with. So back to the movie itself, like, again, he gets the rocket, he goes and saves his friend, and, you know, who is trying to fill in for him in the air. He catches him, he gets in the plane, he lands it. He's a hero. He's the Rocketeer. That's his origin story. Everything's great. Things don't go so well with his love life because Jenny, decides that he's a problem because he messes her things up for her on the movie set when he goes to apologize to her, and then she finds herself in with Timothy Dalton's character Neville Sinclair, who is the third biggest box office draw, which I think is so funny. He's the third biggest box office draw in Hollywood. And at that point, I think it's kind of neat that they mix real Hollywood with this new fake Hollywood. And I don't know, again, I know you're a very old soul, even though you're very young, but like, I don't know if like Clark Gable and like W.C. Fields, like if that like means anything to you, or if you like when you see the characters.
It was, I don't know, this film, like, I have such a nostalgia, even though obviously I did not experience it, like, the golden age of Hollywood. I loved that, I mean, later in the film, they still have, like, Hollywoodland up in the mountains, and, like, their low-key hiding spot is at the Griffith Observatory, the most underground spot in Los Angeles. And I love seeing those references back to old Hollywood like that. It makes the film seem more warm.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's a very cool time period, and again, like I said, there were a ton of movies that came around the same time. One character or actor that I didn't talk about was the Tiny Ron, I think was the actor's name. Yeah, Tiny Ron, who played Lothar. That was about the worst thing in this movie to me, was Lothar, the big goon, because he was like,
he almost is like a Dick Tracy villain, like.
It was them not moving his mouth, like, because there was like that prosthetic on him, and it was like, where is the rocket? The rocket. Yeah. And I'm just like, why? Like, I get that it was 1991 and you didn't have these huge, like, I don't know, these huge like CGI or like the prosthetics or whatever, but it just looked bad. Like, it didn't seem necessary. And you're right, it did seem like a Dick Tracy villain.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's around the same time. So.
I want to say thank you to Michael Dunn for a $5 super chat. Thank you so much. One of my favorite movies of all time, even though my daughter always gave me grief for wanting to watch it again. Thanks for the review. Thank you for the super chat. We appreciate it. Yes, you know what? We were talking a little bit about this earlier. It's funny you would mention that. Katie was talking about how she got started with it and that her dad would watch it. And what would happen with you?
I did not like watching it when I was a kid.
And then you would fall asleep, right?
Yep.
So I just, to me, I don't know. It's kind of cool.
It's interesting, like, over time, as a kid, obviously, it's hard to stay, like, in it with the story. Like, you just know there's bad guys trying to take this rocket. But watching it now, it's such a complex story. It really is. It's fun to follow. Like, I was sitting there on the edge of my seat today. Like, I hadn't already seen it, but it's still interesting. Like, oh, what happens here? Who is that? And it's fun making those connections now.
Yeah. No, I agree. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about it too is that there are a couple transitions in this movie, and one of them really like just sticks in my head. Like, again, talking about Joe Johnston as the director, there's a visual transition where Cliff is flying through the mountains, and then they fade across. I guess he was leaving the Seven Seas and Club, and like he's flying through the mountains, and then you get this fade over to like the mountains turn into this satin pillowcase that Jenny's laying on in Neville Sinclair's bed, and there's something about that moment that just feels like this. Like, I don't know if it's a Star Wars transition or what, but when I see that, it stands out to me. Did that pop for you when you were watching it today?
That scene, it's pretty interesting because it's so different from the rest of the movie. Like, most of the time we're in these, like, it's like a film noir set, and they're like, it's busy, 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 where it just pans to her just, like, motionless in a bed. You're like, what is going on? And it's not, I wouldn't say a dark scene, but it's probably one of the more, like, serious scenes in the film. But it when they're fighting, gives off, like, sorry, you can go.
Well, I was going to say, when they're fighting in the Seven Seas, it feels like Indiana Jones 2 to me.
Yes, I thought so too.
Because it happens in a club like that where they just basically wreck the club. And so that scene feels very Indiana Jones too to me. But after that, when she's laying in the bed, to me at this point, it starts getting a little weird, like a little silly.
Because I mean, like he says it's the chloroform. What it'll wear off in a few moments. What do you mean? She just got chloroform. Like what? She's not okay. She's definitely not okay. And she's just sitting there. Okay, like I guess. And I mean, her whole plan was to end up hitting him in the head and knocking him out. But it's just weird. It's a weird scene.
Well, but and then she sees him in his secret room, and then she goes to find his secret room, and she tries to call for help, and she hears the Germans on there, and then he comes, and she's like, "You're a," and he goes, "A fascist." Like this, it's just
Yeah.
it gets a little overly dramatic at that point. And then there's the whole thing about they catch Cliff, they take him to Howard Hughes. He's like, "You got to give the rocket pack back." He's like, I need one more shot at it." It's like we need to ride one more time. Yeah, I gotta get my best gal. And so when they go back to do that, and this whole, they go to Griffith Observatory, like you mentioned. And to me, and I know you live out that way, but to me, I've always wanted to go there, and pretty much just because of this movie. Like that's literally the one,
Really?
like it's in a lot of movies, obviously, and the tunnel nearby is in a lot of movies like Roger Rabbit. But to me, this showdown at Griffith Observatory, I keep trying to say it very quickly, was so cool that like I want to go there for that. I mean, you've been there, right?
I was watching it today. I was literally sitting watching it today. I was like, oh, I'd love to go to Griffith tonight. Should I just drive up to Griffith tonight? Because it like makes you just like reminisce on LA during the golden years, and it like to just be looking out over the city at the planetarium. It's a pretty scene, and it's like the cinematography near the end I really liked.
Well, so again, this is where it kind of falls apart for me, because as they're having their little showdown here, and Eddie is loyal to Neville until he finds out that Eddie is or that Neville is working with the Germans, and then the Germans come out of the woods. How do you get that many German soldiers in the woods? I don't know. And then the Zeppelin comes up over top of Griffith, and I'm just like, could you not have thought of something better for this? It's just a little, again, love this movie so much. Top 5 Disney movies, swear to God. But when the Zeppelin comes up, I'm like, what were they thinking? And then there's the moment where Cliff goes and runs to the top of the hill, and he's got the gun and the flag behind him, and it's basically the comic cover, and he's kind of looking over to the side, and the American flag behind him, and they're like, "Look, it's the Rocketeer!" And it's like, it's just a little bit too cheesy. Like it's just a little too cheesy. I mean, it's
I
kind
don't
of.
know. I thought it was kind of unrealistic that he just like didn't. No one did anything, and he just is gonna go to the Zeppelin now, which has a huge like it has Nazi propaganda on it, and it's just like no in the middle of LA. I thought it was kind of funny. But that scene was actually filmed next to Magic Mountain, which I thought was interesting too when reading to them. It's a fun fact.
Huh. Okay. Definitely a over the top kind of a thing, and then the fight on the Zeppelin on top of it is a little bit over the top. But there, it's just a little silly at that point. And I wish that there had been a better way out of that one, but still very cool. And then at the end, when Neville falls onto the land part of the Hollywood land sign and takes out the land, and it's just Hollywood.
Right,
that I thought was kind of cute. That was kind of neat.
I thought that was hilarious. It's like the reason now in my head I'm just gonna think that it's not Hollywood land because of the Rocketeer.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the fact that the sign went neglected and fell apart and all that other stuff. No, it's definitely that a Nazi actor fell as a burning ball down and just crushed the LAND. And again, that goes back to the Disney parks, like the Great Movie Ride and the Hollywood Land thing that was in there, and it has that vibe in this movie of those like the late 30s, early 40s as you're walking through Hollywood studios. And even though there is not a Rocketeer attraction, nor will there ever be, I'm sure, They had a feature the summer that this came out in front of the theater where the Rocketeer would appear during Sorcery in the Sky, the fireworks show, for just one summer, which I wish I had been able to see that. But there are other relics that kind of live on in the parks from the Rocketeer if you're looking for them. And I think you said you used to your dad would take you and show you some of those things, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I never saw, but there was lots of Rocketeer sets on the back lot at the studios. And then if I haven't been to Hollywood Studios in a few years, but I'm pretty sure there's like a cart or something with the Rocketeer jetpack, like up in the corner. And then there's Petey's something.
Yeah,
But
so
I think
Peevy,
it's fun that it's in the park.
yeah, Peevy's is actually where you go to get a frozen Coke over in front of Hollywood and Vine. And if you go there, it says Peevy's Refreshments on it, and then if you look over to the left, there's the Rocketeer's jetpack and the helmet, which you can basically reach over and touch it. I mean, it's right there. I mean, they're not hiding it. But yet again, it's not like shoved in your face. And there are a couple little calls like Roger Rabbit's silhouette above Hollywood and Vine that, just little things that don't detract too much, but kind of add an element of like the movies to this area. His footprints are in the cement in front of the theater with like little places where the rocket has burned the ground. And then if you go to the Sci-Fi Dine-In, same thing. They have the helmet in there and a jetpack. So there's a helmet and a jetpack in the Sci-Fi Dine-In restaurant, kind of up in the sides as you're walking in. And then they have them in Peevy's too. So it is neat that there are little throws to it. And like we talked about, the music is still there. The music was like featured in the Fountain of Nations show that they used to do at Epcot too.
That's what I remember it from.
Yeah, so clearly there were some things. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you're good. You're good.
So one of the things that Duncan just said in the chat, the Bulldog Cafe.
That was
I don't know if you
on the back lot.
Right. Did you ever get to see that though?
I don't think I ever saw it. I mean, I've seen video of the Bulldog Cafe back on the lot, but I don't remember seeing it at least.
So it was on the residential street drive-by where you would go down and you would drive by the house of the Golden Girls and Empty Nest, which was a spinoff of Golden Girls, and you would then see like the Bulldog Cafe. What I remember most about it is how small it was, because when you watch in the movie, you just think it's this big thing, and it's just so small when you get to it. And obviously, like, things look bigger in the movies. I assume that it wasn't like there was an actual set inside. It was just for exterior shots. But it was really neat that it was there, and that was, again, one of my favorite parts. That was the one thing that I missed from them tearing down Residential Street to make Lights Motors Action was losing the Bulldog Cafe. I assume it's somewhere. I feel like I looked it up at one point. Maybe somebody bought it or something, but
nice it
was
again.
Yeah, it was a neat thing though that it was there. So, the other thing about the movie itself, though, is that after they've beaten the Nazis and Neville Sinclair is no more, and Cliff has his best gal back, and they go to the diner, everything is like, fine and dandy. And then Howard Hughes shows up with a GB5. They're going to nationals now. They're in, and then he gets his gum. He asked him how it was to fly the thing, and he said it was the closest thing I ever got to heaven. And he looks over at Jenny and goes, well, almost. It was a really cool, neat ending. But before we break away from that, Jenny brings out, because the rocket's been destroyed. Neville wore it to his death. And Howard Hughes burned all the plans because he was like, I never want anything to do with this again. She has the plans that she's gotten from Neville's secret room that Peevy had drawn up before and hands them to him. And says, oh, Peevy, I thought you might like to have this. And then he starts talking about it, but Cliff and Jenny are having their goodbye or their kiss. And so they've got this thing in front of them and they're looking at it. And I'm like, sequel written all over this, right?
Right.
That there should have been more, and there never were more. I guess
have been right. Do we actually want a Rocketeer sequel though?
I mean, kinda. I feel like they wrapped up the story, but like that hasn't stopped us in other movies from having sequels, right? There's a parody thing about Frozen 2 and the pitch for Frozen 2 that's out there, that talks about, didn't we wrap up this story? It's like, yeah, but this is like more story. So I feel like you could have gone more into this, and there were rumblings at one point about them doing like an updated version of the Rocketeer. But what they ended up doing was a Disney Junior show called The Rocketeer, where Kit Secord is a little girl who has the rocket and is going around town saving lives. And there's a Bulldog Cafe in it, and there's a statue of the original Rocketeer. Bill Campbell plays the voice of her dad in it, who is Dave Secord, not Cliff, because it would have been too much time, because it happens modern day. It doesn't happen back, in the 30s. It happens modern day. And she's got a little buddy, and they have, they've got like a rocket car. And there were 22 episodes of this. I don't know how it came. I guess it's just because I don't have little kids. I don't know how it came, and then I never saw it again. But it came out. We don't know if there's going to be a second season. It just ended in July. But I go to watch it last night after we were talking about watching this movie. Again, it's not geared towards me because it's a Disney Junior thing. Right. I mean, it's just this side of Dora. So when I'm watching it, I'm just missing the helmet, because she has a helmet, but then she has goggles so that you can still see her face when she's out there saving lives.
Descriptive thing about the Rocketeer is the helmet, so that's odd to me that they wouldn't add that. They need it. Plus, that'd be so cute, a little girl wearing the helmet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, neat that they brought Bill Campbell back into it and let him be the dad in it, and there is some of that nostalgia to it. I didn't watch the whole thing. I think there is a scene or an origin where she gets the pack, and that she knows she's related to the original Rocketeer. But the episode I saw, there was like some magician that came to town and decided that he wanted the backpack for himself, the jetpack. And then, see, I told you, it's like Dora. I said backpack. That he's getting the jetpack for himself. Germans. Yeah, exactly. Magicians instead of Germans. It's exactly the same thing. It might as well have been a sequel. I just feel like that they set this up so perfectly for a sequel, but maybe it was because of the money. Maybe it was like, hey, we're not going to take a risk like this again. But it just seemed like such a neat premise, and I wish there would be more. I mean, there's talk on chat. Somebody said something about the sequel, on Disney Plus. That'd be great. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. I think it should be a sequel and not a reboot, but I feel like it should happen still back in that era. I think there was something very romantic about that.
I agree. I think it's one of the most appealing things about the film, really, is just the setting, the time. It would be interesting to also, I think Joe Johnston did a really, you can see even in Captain America, I kind of kept relating while watching Captain America to Rocketeer, because you can see it's the same time period around, probably, I think, and it's just a lot of the same shots and costuming, and the way he set up the scenes to display the time, I thought was really well done. So it would be cool to see it done now in 2020 using maybe that same style. I think would be a really good sequel. I do not want to see a reboot, though. I definitely don't want to see a reboot.
No, you can't do a reboot. I mean, it's Cliff and Jenny are who they are. You can't reboot that. And even though this is going on the 30th anniversary next year of this movie, I still think it would be too soon. Is that weird to say? I mean, I think there's more stories to be told. There definitely are, because there's more comics out there that you could take the story right from the comics. But I agree with you. I don't think it needs to be a reboot. I think it needs to be kind of like a Force Awakens, where you bring in some of the old cast. I saw an interview with Jennifer Connelly. She still looks great. Billy Campbell is still acting. I think that you could still pull some of the old crew together and do some kind of a movie at an appropriate amount of time past from the Rocketeer and when he was in there before. So I'd like to see more of it. But, is there anything else you can think of you want to share about this movie?
I don't think there was anything. Oh, one thing I did think was cool that um, Dave Stevens, who did the comic book, actually had a cameo. He was when you're watching the footage from the Germans of their test trials with the rockets, he actually is the guy who puts on the rocket and it blows up. So I thought that was kind of a fun Easter egg in the film.
I mean, did he get to pick that role? Because I feel like I would have
I
gotten
wonder,
tried
like
to find something different.
he was like, yeah, I want to blow up.
Yeah. It's always been my dream to be set on fire in a movie. Dave, dream come true. Okay, so I mean, we've talked about this a lot. Obviously, fanboy, fangirl about this movie a lot. So I don't think it's going to be any surprise. But I do want to ask you, after just having seen this movie, after knowing that it's almost 30 years old, does this stand the test of time? And Katie, would you recommend this movie?
I think this film absolutely stands the test of time. I think anyone can watch this, really, and it's a classic. Like, it really is a classic looking back, like, before, like, superheroes had taken over Disney a little bit. I think the Rocketeer is one of the most prominent figures, and I would recommend this to anyone who loves, like, the old 1930s time period and the style of this film. I would recommend to anyone, even going to the parks. Like, I feel like just if you're at Hollywood Studios, you should see this movie.
Yeah, you know what? For me, I'm going to have to say I would recommend it just because I feel like it's required of anybody who knows me anyway, that they should definitely see this movie because I love this movie. It still gives me the feels. I still think it's a neat story. It is a little slow at times. I can see as a little girl why you would have fallen asleep a little bit for it. Watching it with my wife, she fell asleep watching it, but I was late at night and she had been up for a while. I'm going to go ahead and chalk it up to that. But I could watch this movie over and over again. I think we all have our movies that we could come across and watch it again and again. And I'm not sure this would be that for everybody. But I do think that it's worth watching. It's it's a nice movie. It's about 2 hours long, I think. And because it's a period piece, it kind of does stand the test of time. It's not like something where they're all wearing 80s outfits and it feels dated. It is a period piece. And it's really a neat thing to see. I think the acting is well done. I think that the, effects, except for Lothar's mouth, were pretty much well done in this movie. It's just a fun movie. It's got a little bit of twists and turns to it. And I think it's also a very family-friendly movie. So I think anybody can watch this one and enjoy it. But if you agree or disagree, we'd love to hear your comments. You can hit us up on socials at Deep in the Plus, or you can comment below. Sorry for a few technical glitches when we got started here tonight. But if you can give us a big like, we'd appreciate it so that people can find more of this. And if you have recommendations, of movies you'd like to see us do next, you can hit us up. If you're not a Wigs member, you can hit me up at robw@wdwnt.com. But if you're a Wigs member, you can hit me up in the Discord. And if you are not a Wigs member and you want to be a part of the Wigs members are the WDWNT Interglobe Society, and that is our Patreon program. And if you join, you can get lots of cool things like after shows from some of our bigger shows and other content that we've got out there. So please, if you haven't, just take a look at patreon.com/WDWNT. We would love to have you along. To all our Wigs members that join us every time, thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. And Katie, thanks so much for joining me here tonight. I was so excited when you said Rocketeer because this one's been on my bucket list to talk about. So thanks so much.
Of course. Thanks, Rob.
Yep. Have a good night, guys.